Hello and welcome to the Andrew Ferris podcast. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the show. Today, a guest that I cannot believe that I have not had on to date. I slacked Dave Rekuc not very long ago and said, Dave, why don't you come on the podcast and talk, because it's like a crime that we haven't done this to this point. Dave and I talk e-commerce all the time. And so thought, like, why not record a conversation about what's kind of top of mind for him and what's not. Dave, as you probably know, is the president and COO of Bambu Earth, which is the last remaining 4x400 brand. So Dave and I worked very closely together when I was at 4x400 and stay connected all the time around all of these things. Today on the show, we're going to talk about a number of elements of what is going on at Bambu Earth right now, what Dave is doing to drive actually insane value in that business and see that thing go way forward and be a real monster of an e-commerce business. You are going to like hearing from Dave. He's one of the smartest guys in e-commerce. As if you know his name, if you came in to hear from him, you already know that. Let's not delay it. Let's jump in. All right, Dave, how you doing?
Doing well. Happy to be here again.
Do you feel like offended that it took me this long to invite you on my solo podcast?
Oh, definitely.
I felt offended a little bit on myself.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Huge offense. And I'm going to hold that against you for a very long time.
Yeah. You've always struck me as a guy who's like deeply resentful, sitting on a lot of anger and really holds a grudge. Yeah.
That's what drives me.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, before we get into Bambu Earth, we can talk just a little bit about what's going on with you. I think there's some people who probably know this and some people who don't, but you've had quite the health journey over the last however long, and it's not the first time in your life you've had quite a health journey. Do you want to tell people kind of where you've been and how you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Now that it's a good update. Happy to do that. So we'll start with the good stuff. I'm cancer-free now, as confirmed by medical technology. And I was dealing with testicular cancer so something I learned about cancer is, by the way, the type of cancer that they name it is where it starts in your body. Doesn't actually matter where it goes. It stays that type of cancer. So testicular cancer obviously starts in the testicles, but if it migrates to your abdomen, you don't have abdominal cancer. You don't have, if it goes to your lungs, you don't have lung cancer. And so it started, obviously, testicular cancer. I found out about it last year. But it wound up migrating to my abdomen and had a surgery last year. This year, found out about it in my abdomen. Had to go through about 9 weeks of chemo. And then there was still some left over, which can happen. It could be like scar tissue or even benign stuff, but they have to pull it out. So I had a surgery in the abdomen. Actually flew out to Indiana to do it because that's where the best in the world are. And it was like pretty easy, booked it on points and went out and had the surgery there and came back. Been recovering since, but overall it was a long journey and a lot of interruptions personally, but fortunately got to the end result that I wanted.
Yeah, it's awesome news. It's fun to see. Obviously, we talked a little bit during that time. Hair's back. It's good to see. You look great. You sound great. You were telling me earlier that your energy's coming back, which is really awesome, man. I know you got small kids and a wife and all kinds of stuff going on well beyond work stuff. So I've been glad to get good updates as they've come because that's quite the thing. I'm curious. I mean, you can talk about this as much or as little as you want, but just while we're talking about it, I'm curious what that journey has, if that's given you any life reflections on sort of work and personal and family, and you got any wisdom to share from all this experience. That can be one of the good outcomes of an experience like this, I think.
No, so as you mentioned before, I've gone through something similar in my life, actually even more life-threatening. Testicular cancer has a 99+% survival rate. Even the more advanced cases have really high survival rates. And earlier in my life, when I was 21, I had a bone marrow transplant, which had significantly higher mortality rates to it. And so whenever you go through kind of this thing that challenges your mortality, you certainly have some reflective moments. And I'd say for me, one thing I actually thought was interesting is a lot of people actually have this reflective moment. You find out like they're a lawyer and they were like battling cancer, and then they were just like, F this, I'm not going to like live my life in these four walls. And then they kind of like go start a beach shop or something like that and start like living. But for me, a funny thing that actually came out of it is like, I like doing what I do. Like, and I think I'm of the, fortunate like 0.1%, right? Like where it's like, I get to go make good money and enjoy sort of the game of what we do. I've referred to it as game to my wife, where I'm like, look, it's a game that I get paid to play. Like, and I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about it, because I was taking calls, getting chemo and like working there, like, and not to say that I just can't put it down and workaholic, but like, there's just elements of it that are just still addicting, even after all these years. And that was definitely a part of it that I enjoyed finding out about myself, that this isn't just a grind. And then the other thing is the couple moments you have with your kids and your family, it just became so much more important for me to be present and like just put my phone away or keep my phone upstairs and be there when you're there. And I think that's generally good life advice is be present with wherever you are. It's on a podcast with your good friend Andrew, even though he didn't have you on for a year plus and you're pissed about it. Just be there and, really lace into him.
Be present with the
be present with the anger and really channel it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. It's funny. I've been, our kids are very similar ages, and I've been taking some more drastic actions towards cell phone removal and some of that kind of stuff. And the last couple of weeks, I've loved it. It's funny how little, like, I didn't expect to miss my phone, but like, it's just, once you actually take some steps, it can be, if you can find the right set of steps to take that help you get some distance from that, it can be so helpful. So yeah, I really, really relate to that. And it's funny what you're saying about the game element of this. Taylor Holiday and I had a theory for a long time that the place to look for good sort of e-commerce thinkers and media buyers was like good fantasy sports players. It didn't have to be, we're both baseball guys, but it doesn't have to be baseball. Like, and maybe like good strategy game players would be like another potential place for this. And it's because like the set of mental skills you have to do in those games is like sort of essentially like calculate probabilities and think about strategic interventions you could take where you remove weaknesses and increase potential areas of strength. And you do that in a way that is driven by data sets. You try as best as possible to remove bias from some of those things, especially, you think about it with sports stuff, being able to say like, I don't really care that this guy's on my favorite real life team. If he sucks, I don't want him on my fantasy team, whatever. So, and that's like a bias removal thing. And so I really relate to what you're saying. It's funny to say on the one hand that you're taking calls from chemo, and on the other hand, you want to be more present with things. Because I think the distinction between that is there's one way of being a workaholic, which is that like you're endlessly driven by a desire to get insanely wealthy, and you're chasing something like that, and that I think is probably a little less healthy. But there's another version of it, which is like it's a game you like to play, like you said, and it's fun. It's not a boss standing over your shoulder yelling at you, like going, you better do this or I'm going to fire you. It's not some chase for. It's not a means to an end entirely. The thing is kind of an end in itself. It's like, it's just really fun to try and win. So, and I completely relate to that. Last night I launched some ads for a couple clients, and I really had to discipline myself to not go check it a million times, just because I knew if I did that, it would keep me from sleeping. Not because I was anxious about the performance, but because I just wanted to see what happened, And so, yeah. And so far, by the way, not great performance on those. So let's get into it. So what's going on at Bambu? How's the business doing? And can you give us any sense of what's going on? Maybe for the few people who don't know what Bambu Earth is, who have tuned into this, give them a quick sense of what the business is like.
Yeah. So Bambu Earth, all natural skincare for, primarily serving women and primarily serving, I would say now we've kind of honed in on like a 45 plus type demographic is probably the bread and butter of who we serve. And when we say natural skin, you I think wrote the copy, seriously clean skincare or, truly natural, because a lot of skincare out there tries to be natural, but winds up having quite a bit of other things added to it. So no preservatives, no water added to it, which is really uncommon. And so it's typically like 3 to 5 ingredients in most of our stuff. And so we're 95% D2C, 5% Amazon, and a rounding error of wholesale.
Yeah. Awesome. And it's going well?
It is going well. So we're still growing about 50% year over year or so. And last year was really a breakout year for us. So we're in 8 figures now and still growing about that 50% year over year rate.
So so that was the logic in part with 4x400, right? With the big hypothesis shift was like, let's get rid of the worst upside or the worst opportunities and focus on the bigger one. Bambu Earth, Taylor has been fairly public with a lot of the numbers there with the connection to CTC and some of those things too. but checks a lot of boxes for what you'd look for in a good brand. Can you just also give people a sense of those things? Why does the brand work? Besides, let's talk about the obvious. Actually, it's worth noting something you just said, which is like the product is actually great. People love it, and that's reflected in some of the metrics that I'm sure you're going to talk about. But I think it's helpful to think about like sort of business design and P&L design for what makes a good e-commerce brand at a base level. Besides the table stakes, I think, which is like actually caring about serving your customers with a good product, which I would say, especially in the earliest days of Amber's formulations, Bambu definitely checks that box.
I mean, there's so many things that are attractive about it, and I've had some practice generalizing this because I've looked at some other people's P&Ls and other people's businesses and started to think about like how do I generalize the description of what it is that I like about Bambu Earth. So starting with the actual product, first of all, I'm not an apparel brand that has to worry about carrying thousands of SKUs. I'm not a brand that has to worry about closeouts or clearance because I'm carrying the same 25 SKUs all the time. Okay. And just restocking those 25 SKUs. There's some seasonality to the brand. Like there's a little bit of peaks. January Q1 does well generally. We're a little bit weaker in the summer. We're talking about like a 10 to 15% fluctuation. I mean, there are brands out there that 10x in Q4, and that's their bread and butter. And you have to manage the ramp ups, ramp downs. I'm talking about our worst month is 30% off from our best month. Like it's just not a huge fluctuation. So that stability matters a lot for managing things like inventory, turnover, costs against the brand, et cetera. And then if you start to dive into kind of the financials or the harder metrics, so those are like soft things that you can look for. Start to dive into the financials. Taylor shared this, that we're in the ballpark of 70% delivered margins. So, delivering it to their door, 70% margins. And again, that is delivered based on the order composition that we have today. If you started selling tons of one-off products, that's not what it would be. But we do pretty well with near $100 AOV and 5.5 average units per order, which is just fantastic. And that's how we kind of beat down the ratio of the value of the goods versus the shipping, the carrier costs and the pick and pack. And we're able to deliver a lot of value and still maintain those kinds of margins.
I'm a big believer that AOV is a highly overrated metric in e-commerce because it doesn't necessarily factor in margin. But the one place where I think it is a helpful metric actually is in relation to shipping cost. And so in that respect, it tends to be margin positive because, it's really hard if you're shipping anything to anyone in e-commerce to ship for much less than $5. And so, $5 against a $30 AOV just is really, really different than against a $100 AOV in terms of the margin impact. And so what you just said makes a ton of sense, right? Just that part of the way that Bambu generates really high margin is COGS themselves, of course, and skincare obviously is a high margin business to begin with on just pure gross margin side. But on top of that, by having a product where there's people putting 5.5 units in per order on average, whether you're charging for shipping or not, that shipping cost just represents a much smaller percentage of the total.
Yeah. And then there's, a part of this, the way I want to express this is the carrying cost of our items is quite low. So the way to think about that is because we manufacture in-house, it basically, you think about the full composition of what it takes to put a product in somebody's hands. You have the raw materials, then you add labor, right? In just like very simple terms, raw materials plus labor equals a finished good. So raw material, labor, and then pick, pack, and carrier fees. That's 95% of the cost of putting something in someone's hands. So what you have to stock well in advance is the raw material. And you have to have a consistent pipeline of labor to turn it into that finished good. And so the labor you're constantly realizing on this monthly basis. But because of the fact that your demand is relatively steady, you can hold relatively steady labor. And so there isn't a lot of costs of ramp up, ramp down, ramp up, ramp down. Nope. You get people in, train them, keep them, and produce goods on a relatively flat basis. And stock a relatively consistent amount of raw materials and turn those in. And so financially, what that means is that the real carrying cost is this raw material, which is constantly being added 1 month's worth of labor. And that labor would usually be part of a finished good for somebody that purchases this in advance, right? So like they would ultimately, if I go to a contract manufacturer, the purchase price for a finished good is actually very similar to my in-house. We're just not at a scale where we're like massively saving on this sort of thing. So it's very similar. But the interesting thing is I'm not paying that labor 4 months in advance like a lot of brands are, because they have to stock this well in advance. So I'm only carrying the raw materials 2-3 months in advance and constantly adding the labor real time, which means that financially for this business, it means that I'm a much better cash flowing brand than even my other skincare peers, because I'm only paying those raw material stocking costs. And the way I'd express that in financial terms is my gross working capital. So like the inventory prior to any liabilities to offset it is actually very low. And so whether I offset it significantly with liabilities, meaning terms with my supplier, borrowing, whatever, isn't that important, right? I mean, like I could do it and I still should do it, but it just isn't nearly as important or punitive if I get it wrong compared to other brands. So it's a really important component, and people rarely frame it that way. So that's where I want to take a minute to.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. It's also obviously the fact that it's also, again, high margin on the pure COGS level before you are paying shipping costs. Like the raw materials are just not that expensive relative to the cost of that you can charge for the product. And so on top of the sort of time advantage you just referenced by manufacturing in-house, it's also just as a percentage, it's just pretty low. And so, which I'm assuming means that obviously you've forecasted this business, and because of seasonality and because of the sort of maturity of the business at this point, forecasting is probably an easier game than it once was. And I'm by easier, I mean the error bars are a little narrower probably than they were before. That said, I also am assuming that means that you don't really have to, like, it's a bigger problem for you to run out of something than to keep enough on hand. Like it's probably fairly easy to stay in stock, generally speaking, because the cost of doing that is just not that high.
So then this brings me to kind of one of the last components, is that by running the in-house production, I don't necessarily think it's a competitive advantage in the sense that I have massive cost savings, that I'm able to produce a product that others aren't. Honestly, there's 100 contract manufacturers in the United States that could produce the same product that we do. But one thing I do think it is it financially engineers the business to be leaner from a cash perspective, because for about a 9-month period, I turned over finished goods in 2 to 4 weeks, meaning my entire inventory was sold out. By the time I put it on the shelf, the maximum time it took to leave the shelf was 4 weeks for a period of 9 months. I'm now holding 8 weeks of inventory, which to us is like, we're swimming in goods. There's so many brands that you're working with that if they were an 8-week inventory, they would be panicking because because
they'd be out of cash, right?
And they have to maintain 4 months of inventory because their lead times are, I would say average is probably closer to 90 or 120 days turnover of inventory, not 20, that we're averaging. So that it created that like very just in time for our finished goods. And then lastly, the last component that is just fantastic about it is the lifetime value. We get about 100% of additional revenue, compared to the initial AOV. So $100 first order, and then they'll come back and spend another $100 with us over a course of a year on average.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that I think, immediately people go, how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you get that LTV? And the answer is you make a really good product in a consumable category and deliver on your promise to your customer. That's how you do it. It's like, I'm sure you're, I know what the flows are like. The emails are good, all those things, right? The brand I think is cared for. Amber had initially put her heart into actually resonating with people in a way that's meaningful. But ultimately, if the stuff doesn't help people's skin, they're going to stop buying it, no matter how much they like the brand. It's like, and no matter how much they like the emails or whatever.
Well, I agree with you like 90, 95%. The last component I would throw out there is that like you could, I don't know, wave a magic wand and have an alternate universe where somebody else is running this business in a different way and probably get a 50% LTV. And it wouldn't even be necessarily run poorly. But the important part is that the way you acquire customers frames LTV so much, and people don't fully appreciate that. And I didn't either until I worked on a high LTV brand and saw that in action.
You know, if you have listened to me on this show for a while, that one of the things I believe is fundamental to e-commerce is the ability to scale the business without spending lots and lots of money on OpEx. That's part of where you create profit in your business. And there is a way to double up on that, not only by running lean, but by running smart with effective, excellent hiring via incredible e-commerce talent in the Philippines with my friends at More Staffing. And you can visit them at morenow.co to go get incredible virtual professionals in your business from the Philippines. Amazing e-commerce talent. The beauty of working with More Staffing, they're going to recruit excellent talent in the Philippines, pay them a lower rate than, of course, you would pay that person in the US, but it is a much higher rate than local rates in the Philippines. I talked about this on a recent episode with More Staffing CEO Lara Guevara, who talked through the whole economics of why this works, why it's a great deal for people in the Philippines, and why when you work with More Staffing, you attract incredible talent into your business. So it's not just about cheap. It's not just about hiring the lowest cost virtual assistant that you can. It's about hiring amazing talent. More Staffing will walk you through all of how to do it. If you are growing and expanding your team, you should be considering doing that in the Philippines. High integrity, hardworking, wonderful people who speak great English and who are ready to work hard and do a great job in your business at a lower cost than you would get locally. More Staffing will hold your hand through the whole thing. They will onboard, coach, train, all of it. They're just great. Go check them out at morenow.co to get incredible talent from the Philippines added to your business. Go do it. Talk about that a little bit more. I mean, I know there's some ways to think about sort of the first order testing that you do that is in relation to sort of ROAS, right? But there's another way of thinking about it in relation to actual LTV. But expand on the basic point that you just made, that like how you acquire a customer matters a lot for their LTV.
So one of the important things is that, like, I see a lot of brands that, especially in consumable products, sell one-off products. Like, so they have a catalog of products and they sort of look at this and say, we have a moisturizer here, let's go sell moisturizers. We have toners here, cleansers. We have, these sunscreen products, these whatever products. And they build different pipes that point to these and, and sell those. And the thing that misses the mark there is that if I went and did that, I would cut our LTV in half. It would go clean in half. Even our top selling product, if you look at it on a 60-day LTV basis, our kits will be like 40% for most of our kits, and 70% would be like an outlier, meaning like, again, you placed a $100 order and 40% would be you placed another $40 over 60 days. Individual products will be like 15, 20%. And what I did is I actually did an analysis on the repeat rate of an individual product. So call this like unique product repeat rate. So if you experience this product in any way, what's the likelihood you come back and buy this product in any form? And I ignored mini size, full size, whether it's in bundles, etc. And all of those repeat rates are considerably lower than the customer level repeat rate. And what that means is that if you only sold them one product, you would only realize that repeat rate of that one product. So I'm going to make up figures here, but let's say I have a product that has a 20% repeat rate. If that's the only thing I sell to my customers, then that's the only thing they're going to come back and buy on. But if I sell them 5 products with a 20% repeat rate, I might be able to enjoy a 35% customer repeat rate or a 40% customer repeat rate, because they're going to find one of those that they're going to come, 1 or 2 or 3 that they're going to come back and repeat on. So that is one universal, generally is a...
So even if they stick with their other brand's moisturizer that they've liked for a long time, maybe the toner is like, oh man, this toner is way better than my other toner. And so they hold on to that, even though you're selling them a whole kit of stuff and you're thinking like, okay, the idea is like, well, they'll use my kit all the time in my exact sequence of products, but that's just probably not reality. They're probably going to, toner from here, moisturizer from here. Whatever.
It's also probably just the fact that they just don't do a full routine constantly. They just do the 2 to 3 products that they like instead of the 6 products that they're supposed to. I'll just do a cleanser and a moisturizer. That's all I want to do. And they'll just wind up doing those regularly and throw in something else every once in a while, an eye product or something. But yeah, it's exactly right. And so the way you introduce them, so again, I sell them a kit of products. I sell them 4, 5, 6 products in a routine. They're going to be more likely to repeat. Not only are they going to be more likely to repeat, but they have more things that they're more likely to come back and buy, not just one. They're more likely to repeat at a higher dollar value. I could sell them a mini kit, which lasts them 2 weeks, which means they're going to repeat faster. I could sell them a full-size kit, which means that they're going to repeat slower, but actually do so at a higher dollar value because they had longer to experience your product and decide that I do, yes, indeed like it. And there's probably maybe a little self-selection in there, people that are willing to spring for the big kit up front. But regardless, we'll have a higher dollar value in a long term, like a 1 year, 2 year period. So the way that you construct that initial offer really matters quite a bit in terms of your lifetime value. So to cap that off, the way I think about this is like as if I were a portfolio manager for an investing company, because ultimately that's what I wind up doing as the president here is saying, okay, I'm going to invest in advertising that's going to bring back a return to me. And I'm thinking about that in like contribution margin dollars. And so one, I want to deploy as much cash as possible because ultimately, if there's a positive investment, you can go find people that will give you money that costs less than the positive investment. So I essentially have infinite spend, right? Like I could go spend $50 million if I knew I was going to get $100 million back, like you have a cash printing machine. So I want to find the best return on investment at the largest scale. And so for me, that means over an applicable period, 60-day, 90-day, 1 year LTV, where I'm looking at margins, not revenue, and relating that back to the initial spend, and then saying, at what volume can I do that? Because I actually have a couple competing pipes or kits that I can get a better return here, but it's at a quarter or a fifth the scale of my, let's say, Skink Whiz, which is my largest pipe, which is nice, but no matter how hard I push that on ad spend, I'll never be able to get to that, that scale that's 5x that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So you're then thinking about not only how do I maximize my LTV, but how do I maximize my reach while having positive contribution across all of them. So you actually may take a lower LTV on some stuff as long as the total investment is still positive.
Yeah, I don't care. I want to give Meta some dollars and get back more dollars, and I want to do it as much as possible in whatever configuration that is.
Right. This is definitely something people, I think, sometimes they frame the idea of testing as finding winners. And I think the framework that is that's most obvious for people in their minds, it's like availability heuristic, basically. It's like the thing they think about when they think about that idea is like A beats B. And so we'll keep A and we'll cut B. But actually the better way to think about most testing is like A and B may both produce something valuable. A may produce more things that are valuable, but it may not be able to produce any of what B produces. And so if you can get both, even if B is only a 10% additional volume to A, that's actually 10% incremental increase of volume, and therefore you actually want both. You want to reach the most people as possible. And of course, like when you start on the meta creative level, this is really obvious in the sense of sort of like reaching different platforms, and maybe some people never use Facebook and they only use Instagram, and maybe people only use stories, and so getting placements right, video versus still, product versus product, etc. There's a million ways to sort of combine all these sorts of things up. But I like what you're saying a lot in terms of essentially offers, right? Like you're thinking about offers that may actually reach different people and not just trying to get the one kind of person, but actually changing up the offer as the core lever of how you expand your reach.
Yeah, that's true. But one caveat to that, though, is there are times when, as a business, that you're able to create an offer that is just so overpowering that it becomes like your primary. And like a great example of this is like, go look at like a Fabletics. Like they pump this. This is, omni-channel advertising to the extreme, right? Like this is pumped on, I think Kevin Hart is one of their, celebrity endorsers. So it's happening on his organic social, TV commercials, obviously Meta, TikTok, all the typical digital channels, but they're all pumping the same or similar offers, which are pushing their membership that have this like huge upfront bait. And it's like 70% off or 2 for 24 shorts. And what they've done is like, they've nailed that 1, 2, 3, 4 offers that are just like categorically better than trying to sell customers at full price without a membership. Like they've done the math. They've essentially figured that out, that is a categorically better. And what I'm going to use here is like a term that I think about in like a conceptual level, capture of margin per 1,000 impressions. Like it just is more efficient at capturing margin for my business every time I get anyone's attention. And so our skin quiz is like almost there. Like we have a couple other pipes, but like it really does dominate in terms of its ability. And I actually think this is something that Taylor and I have talked about a couple times is people are focused on the cost side of advertising. It's like your CPM. And you've heard the term like arbitrage before when talking about like Facebook or TikTok, which is what they're roughly referring to is CPMs are cheaper than they should be right now. You're able to get a good return on those because they're cheaper than what you believe the long-term market rate will be for those CPMs. And it is now an opportunity to go buy them quickly while they're there and get a return on that investment quickly, because later on it won't be a very good return or a return at all. And while that's true, those opportunities happen. Like the Threads app just came out, right? Like so like it's possible ad space picks up, right? And all of a sudden there's more ad space available than advertisers adopt very quickly. And you have this window of like, oh, Threads ads are really crushing it, or Reels ads or Stories ads or whatever. And then advertisers rush to and fill that gap pretty freaking quickly, especially in the current economy. But if you think about this, like this free market competition going on here, advertisers themselves are essentially setting this market rate. Like who's paying the cost per thousand? Those that can afford the margin extraction per thousand, those that are getting a profitable margin extraction for that cost per thousand. So the best insulation you can have long-term to that pricing is to be the leader in margin extraction per thousand, is to be by far, like categorically better than everyone else. Say, screw you guys, I'm going to set the market because I get the best margin per thousand when I advertise. And that's ultimately how you move your spend up. That's ultimately how you can insulate yourself from rising prices.
Because you can take a lower return, basically, on the first purchase. Yeah. Yeah. And this is one of the arguments that I think all the time about, like, sometimes people will say sort of in a hand-wavy way, like, you should definitely be profitable on first purchase, and that way you can capture value on your LTV. And my answer to that is like, that's just true. Like, there are just like plenty of times. No, most brands probably should be, right? The vast majority of brands probably should be. And, Bambu is probably right on the line of brands that could consider actually taking a lower return on first purchase at 100% LTV. But I think that there are plenty of brands that and there's some, I shouldn't say plenty, there's some brands that blow away the Bambu LTV and that actually their margin extraction per 1,000 impressions is way, way higher if they actually take a loss on first purchase. And by thinking about the value of your customer in that respect, yeah, I think you're 100% right. The place where this actually gets, I think, really interesting, where that competition is even more obvious, is like in a truly limited environment like search, where it's like, people are willing to probably, I haven't run subscription supplement search ads, but I imagine those clicks get expensive because people are going to play this game in this really significant way. But what I've come to realize is that, like, the ROAS that you get, I should say the CAC that you get, is much more tightly correlated at the same scale across multiple brands. The CAC that you get is much more tightly correlated on Meta anyway to AOV, not LTV. So, like, what I mean is, if two brands can generate $100 AOV in massively different categories with massively different LTVs, they will probably be able to spend. Let's say we put the same marketer on both teams. Okay. So they're basically same skill level of marketer, same AOV, but just different categories, different LTV. I think that if they were to spend to the exact same first order margin, they would be able to spend a very similar amount of money overall, right? If they can spend $100,000 at a 2-to-1, they can probably both do that. The difference, though, and this is, I think, part of what you're saying, is that if you can actually extract more value over the long term, then that's the difference, and that you can actually spend more, not because the customer is the same price up front, or a customer's a different price up front, but because you can extract more value over time. And so understanding that difference is where I think the real arbitrage is, like you're saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so I agree slightly. Like, I do think that, take a skincare company that gets a 1.5, you can't necessarily sell like the shoes. Like, somebody selling shoes is not going to be taking, it's $100 for skincare, $100 for shoes. Somebody selling shoes is not going to be taking a 1.5, even though it's in that range. And part of the reason for that is because the skincare buyers are tagged as in market for skincare, and we are competing to a degree. Skincare is competing against skincare, and there is some known LTV component of something like skincare, right? as opposed to shoes, which is, there probably is, but it's a much longer frame than it's realized in. But I generally agree with you that a lot of the competition happens for the AOV, not for the LTV. And part of the reason I think, like, my theory behind that is how I would explain that to myself is the customer has to trust you on that initial order. Whereas on the subsequent orders, you've already earned that trust, right? So like, no matter what, if they're taking $100 out of their pocket to buy from a brand they've never heard of prior to today, there's $100 of risk in it. So the rate that you can convince them to take that jump is relatively similar because they're taking $100 out of their pocket no matter what.
Yeah, this is very similar to how I've thought about this. It's because of exactly what you're saying. It's because the first order always feels like the first order to the customer. The customer is not thinking about the fact that they're probably going to place 5 more or whatever, They're thinking about that first order and then going from there. And so in the consideration phase of the customer's head, that's why the CAC is relative to the AOV, not the LTV. It makes perfect sense in terms of people's spending habits. Yeah. So what else is working for you guys at Bambu? Why is the business working, and what are you doing that you're seeing forward movement on and that people should know?
Yeah, I mean, so one interesting thing about Bambu is like when I have a breakthrough win, I get 6 to 12 months runway till the next time I need to have a breakthrough. And so what I mean by that is like, okay, so say $100 upfront AOV, right? And then $100 LTV after that for the course of the year. We will essentially normalize right around 50% repeat revenue. So if I have a breakthrough that drives me up to $500,000 in acquired revenue, then it takes about 6 to 12 months for the repeat revenue to slowly approach that $500,000. So it will take me 6 to 12 months to realize the fact that, oh, I have $1 million a month business, even though I've been running at the $500,000 acquisition that created that $1 million business 9 months ago. But it took me that long to know this is exactly where my ceiling is. It took me that long for the full revenue to approach that. And so there's been a couple of breakthroughs that we've had, and we've talked so much about offers right now, I'll keep it there. We had a big breakthrough initially on offers where, again, the skin quiz, we were doing well. We were running at about $100,000, $125,000 a month in terms of ad spend. And I ran a test where I said, instead of just selling the mini exclusively, the 2-week version, let's just add the option of the full size. And so they're going from something that is about $75 or $80 for the mini, and the full size costs like $150 to $200 on the first order. But I found 30% were taking the full size right away with no hit on conversion rate. So we experienced almost a 30 to 40% increase in margin per session like that. And my allowable CAC just went, boop, it just went right up. And instead of just taking, so this is a great point that you're making, is that, we could have just taken 10%, 15% up front, whatever it is, 20% up front. We could have, but I traded that back to the market for triple the volume. And then all of a sudden the account was running at $300K a month, $350K. So that one change in our margin per thousand capture or margin per session allowed me to basically triple the account. And then the following 9 months was just realizing the growth from that breakthrough.
Yeah. How was the LTV difference on a full-time versus mini kit purchaser? My theory would be the LTV would be worse on a 60-day window, but better on a 1-year window. That would be my hypothesis going in.
Correct. Which also took me a year to find out, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, just because you would go through it so much slower, and some of those products they last a long time, et cetera. Yeah. I've obviously been in that business, but I didn't know if that was the answer or not. I could also imagine somebody kind of, yeah.
I had the same theory, it's like, are we screwing ourselves because you don't have that 60-day bump anymore? But what you did is you traded a little bit of that 60-day bump for cash right now, right at the purchase. And so instead of needing to take a $5 loss and then make it back in 30, 60 days or whatever, you just break even day one, and then you can eat a little bit over the 60 days and then eat quite a bit over the year.
Well, and this is another thing I think about high LTV businesses is that like the cash challenge. So this is actually sometimes where I think the notion of like a 60-day window for LTV may not be that helpful for some businesses, because the cash challenge is relative to the business's life cycle and growth stage and those kinds of things. If you have these big, highly valuable returning customer cohorts that produce value over time, actually, like at some point, especially if you're if your acquisition is incessantly scaling, then it's really hard to realize the value from those unless the value is like really massive. And so it still becomes a cash challenge to grow because you constantly have to stock more inventory, or you're constantly paying for new customers, and you're constantly waiting for those new customers to have their value come through. And so it sort of pushes out the value realization over time, over and over again. But if you get to some point where your acquisition gets somewhat more stable, actually, those returning customers produce so much more cash than your new customers because you don't have to pay Meta, that you start realizing the cash from the returning customers. And therefore, you actually could use the returning customer cash to front more new customer acquisition, even if you took a lower margin on that, but you had a 1-year payback window on it because now you've got all the cash from returning customers. And I've actually worked with a business that's doing this kind of thing right now, where actually their cash, it's like a weird e-commerce thing, but their cash is starting to beat their EBITDA every month in this like weird way where it's this very strange situation relative to, it's the exact opposite of most e-commerce businesses. They're actually realizing all this cash. And that's because of the way the like timing works, and including like, if they I think they have a pushed out payback period with Meta. So they're waiting 45 days to pay their Meta bill every time, So all those things happen. But anyway, the point is, that actually then allows you to start to think on a little bit of a broader timeline and think, almost more like you said, like a portfolio manager, where it's like, I actually am not trying to necessarily just generate a bunch of cash on 60 days. What I actually am trying to do is generate that cash over a longer period of time because I know it's going to come. I'm going to be here in a year when this business is still around, and I'm not going to die in that time period. And therefore, as long as I have the cash to float that, I can be a little bit more aggressive there. So really quick,
the financial framing that I want to try to get people to understand this better is like, it's change in working capital. So like the exception that you just gave us is a negative change in working capital every month. And so what that means is that they're increasing their liabilities faster than they're increasing their current liabilities faster than current assets. And so what that means is that they keep owing more and more against.
Which scenario you're saying?
That's negative working capital change.
Yeah. That's it.
That's in the scenario of your business that's generating more cash than profit.
Correct.
Okay? So where you have that weird scenario where they're actually pulling in more cash than profit, they have their negative working capital absorption. So as they're going up, their working capital is actually going down and into the negatives. And that money that they
because
have,
the liabilities are going up.
Exactly. So that money that they have that's above the profit is actually essentially a loan from either their vendors, Meta, et cetera. But basically that's a loan or a liability in some form, but you're realizing it in a real way that you can go spend it. It's a loan, very often unsecured, without interest, without terms, whatever. So that's negative working capital absorption. And then the other scenario that you described where you're saying, hey, you can actually take a loss and continue as long as you've got this predictable, super strong LTV, is all that is doing is just saying, hey, instead of just going like ramping zero to a million in spend, slowly absorb this. Like we're going to need to increase the amount of working capital. So that's positive working capital absorption. But what we've done is spread it out over a long enough period of time that it's manageable from a cash perspective. So they are actually, what they're doing is the reverse. Instead of borrowing money out of the business, they're taking some of the profits and they're throwing it in, getting locked inside the business. And that's growing. But what you're doing is you're getting a bigger business around. And so like is working capital going up or is working capital going down? Net working capital, which is just defined as current assets minus current liabilities. That's a really good way to think about, on top of what we're doing on a P&L, the change in working capital is the adjustment for cash. Does that make sense?
Well, what do you mean by the adjustment for cash? The adjustment from what for cash?
So I bottom line $1 million out of profit on a P&L. Okay. Just
EBITDA. Yeah.
I'm just going to say profit.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
So
profit,
it's
sure. Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
So I bottom line $1 million over the course of a year, but I only realize $800K in cash. What's the delta? Why? Because my working capital increased by $200K. That's the answer to it. And it's $200K got stuck inside my business, inventory, whatever. It's stuck inside my business in some way. And that's why I couldn't get it. I only got $800K.
Which may, in fact, be exactly what you want that capital to be doing, right? In some cases, right? Because what it represents is the continued investment into, what you're saying is that like, it's the best use of this cash is for me to buy more inventory, right? because I can make a return on that inventory that's going to produce increased value or something like that, right? So it's not necessarily a problem, especially as long as you have the cash to meet all of your obligations and your operating expenses and all those things.
One thing I want to come back to, because you talked about two different generalizations that Taylor usually is like a big champion of, is break even on first order, and then I forget what the other 60 day is out to feet. And one interesting like liberty that you and I have is that like we could talk about nuances and think about nuances because we're working on either one or a very small handful of brands. And your handful of brands, by the way, is like extremely curated to be like smart people that you want to work with who get it. Okay. So like, versus either running a large agency that has a lot of clients that you don't have that personal relationship, as well as a megaphone that is generally projecting to the industry more widely. And I've had conversations like this with Taylor, and what I find is it's not that Taylor doesn't understand the nuance, that he can understand that you could lose $5 and still be profitable. He's just so tired of the 1,001st client coming in and saying, but I could lose $10 and still be profitable. I just like, no, you freaking can't. Like, just get your head around the fact that you need to break even or better on the first order. Stop thinking about the edge cases. You aren't it. And so like we have the liberty of having that nuance, but it's not that we disagree with Taylor in that sense. It's that he's just had to scream this so many times at people that are not that edge case that we're talking about, that it's like, just stop,
Well, so what you're framing is really right. I mean, you're right. I don't disagree with what Taylor's saying there at all. And I actually think part of the value of me saying that is the conversation, and people who are listening, who are taking the time to listen to a 45-minute or an hour conversation between you and me or whatever, are the kind of people who are interested and curious enough to kind of try to go really deep on some of these issues where you're going to talk about working capital in the terms you just did. And so I think that part of the value is to try to help people think through these general principles applied to their specific businesses and to sort of poke at those things. Because I completely agree with you. If you're tweeting or if you're putting together a guide or whatever, yeah, there's a world where like what Taylor has to do is something very different than what I have to do. And even really than what you have to do, because you really have to think about one business specifically. You do a little bit of consulting.
Yeah, everything I do here can be misinformation. This doesn't actually matter to me. I just go back and run a business at the end of the day. It's just one.
That's right. But it's funny because actually another thing that you're getting at, and I think this is something this is actually a great episode to bring this point up. One of the things I'm constantly reading with clients of mine is their sophistication. And I'm trying to factor that into the advice that I'm giving. And what I mean is like the possibility that they actually can't manage to the advice that I'm giving is a real possibility, right? That in fact, they should take a first order profit, not because it's like the highest percentage return on their dollar or whatever, but because it's going to make the business more complicated if you don't take a first order profit, And so if you aren't sophisticated enough to do that, that's fine. Or there's something I bring up all the time is goals. It actually might be the case that your goal is to have the least stressful business possible that produces as much cash as possible. Well, look, you're probably not going to build as big of a business with as much shareholder value if you have very high LTV and you take first order profitability. But that's all right if your goal. And so that's the other thing there is that like there's some element here where people will have to have a sense of kind of their own ability to manage these things. And by the way, I don't say that with any condescension. If I was running a business right now, I can speak with some authority to these things, but like, let's take just me and you. You are way clearer on a lot of things we talked about in this episode in your head than I am. I can follow and talk with you about it for sure, but I know for a fact that some of those concepts are a little bit trickier for me to get my head around when I talk about them. And therefore, I would probably put myself in like a C+ category of being able to manage those things. And I
like
would
working capital absorption. Yeah, and like cash management. Yeah.
Yes, I'd want to make the game a little easier on myself because that's one of the places where I could go wrong.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And a great parallel back to like the investment thing. If you sat down with a financial advisor, the very first thing they ask you is, what are your goals? And because there's a reason for that, because a financial advisor, anyone that's worth their salt will tell you the best investment plan for you is the one you will actually stick to. As soon as you deviate from the plan, you create damage. Because there's, again, in financial, it's different. It's like there's holding periods, there's this, that, et cetera. So yes, you could look at a business and prescribe an objective apex for operation, But if you deviate from the plan and can't do it and can't manage the cash and have to borrow at MCA rates and have to, overnight inventory in because I prescribed you a 4-week turnover and you can't do it, then that's not the apex. So the best apex for profitability, for cash, et cetera, is the one you can actually stick to the plan. The objective apex doesn't matter.
It's a bit like dieting advice, I think, which is like the most effective, like the number one factor in that people have studied in the most effective diets is adherence. Basically, eat anything you want, with obviously not anything you want, but like do whatever diet you want as long as you'll do it. If you can actually stick to
Stay
it.
on it.
Yeah, right. Or also similar to Morgan Housel's comments in Psychology of Money about like him paying off his house. He's like, listen, I know that I had a very cheap loan on my house. I know that it wasn't the way to maximize my total dollars, but you know what I don't have anymore? A house payment. You know what that means? I sleep a little better. And that's probably worth it to me. So it was the right decision for us. So, all right, we got to be done. Where should people follow up with you to get all that good Dave Rekuc content?
There's a website called twitter.com. That's where you'll find me too much.
What about threads.net?
Threads.net I am on, but so far I've posted zero value. It's probably negative value, waste your time. So you can find me there. It's a hedge, actually. In case Twitter goes sideways, I'm on Threads. I'm on LinkedIn too, but it'll take me 2 months to accept your invite. So,
yeah. At Dave Rekuc.
That's right.
Are you at David or Dave? I can't remember.
Unfortunately, on Twitter, I'm at Dave Rekuc, and then on Threads, I'm at David Rekuc. Yeah. So, good luck, guys.
Wow. That is so confusing.
It's so terrible.
That's funny. All right, man. Thanks for your time. Glad you're doing well. Glad Bambu is doing well. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it with Dave. Just one of my favorite people in e-commerce. So smart, so good at thinking through how to grow e-commerce brands. I hope that was helpful to you. It was helpful to me. It was very helpful to me as I thought about how to get the most out of my clients. Don't forget to follow Dave on Twitter, at Dave Rekuc. He is going to be probably the best follow that you will add if you have not added him already in a long time. He shares all kinds of really good data, real, honest, live stuff. It's great. And I know he gets some occasional consulting requests. He tries to keep it fairly low, but, beat down the door if you really want to see if you can get an hour of his time. Okay, that's it for this week. Please don't forget to visit More Staffing by going to morenow.co if you are trying to scale up your team in an incredibly cost-effective way with incredible virtual professionals, by going to morenow.co and doing that in the Philippines with More Staffing. I love More Staffing. I'm so happy to have them as a sponsor. Please go check them out. And of course, subscribe to this channel, to this podcast, wherever you're watching or listening to this. I would love for you to do that. Tell a friend about it. That's actually the number one way you can help me if this content has been useful to you. As always, I would love to hear from you too. You can reply in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or else podcast@ajfgrowth.com is the place to email me. You can also reach out to me on Twitter, Andrew J. Ferris. I would love to hear from you. Next week on the show, I've got another solo episode coming for you. I think that's going to be helpful to you as well. And then a bunch more interviews coming up. I've got Jack Rubin from Purdy and Fig, who's got just a monster of a business that I've gotten to look at from the inside. He's going to be on. Ezra Firestone still coming soon. A couple of incredible, real deep dives into businesses in live ways. There's just lots of really good content coming. Don't miss out on it. Subscribe wherever you can. That's all. You know what to do. You know how to interact with internet content. I will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Script with my eyes closed.